In this video, we're going to build the view you see here using the data binding library for Android. Every widget you see on the screen will be set using data binding. There isn't a single find view by ID method call. The view has a rating bar, the number of ratings, a title, an image being set with the glide library and a custom binding adapter, a price, a quantity, and an add to cart button. If you click the quantity box, a dialog is inflated where you can select a number from 1 to 10. After a number is selected, the quantity is updated with that number. If you're new to data binding or you've never heard of it before, let me give you some basic information before we look at the examples. The Android data binding library was first introduced in 2015. The goal of the data binding library is to reduce the total amount of tedious code that developers have to write and to make code more concise and readable. Obviously, as a consequence of writing less code and making code more concise, there's typically a significant speed increase when it comes to development time. Some things you'll notice right away about the data binding library are you don't need to write find view by ID, layout files contain their own logic code, and your code will be much more organized. Now that you have an idea of what we'll be building and why we'll be building it, let's get started. Okay, so we can cover more in this video in less time. I've provided a starting point for the video. So go to my GitHub, go to Mitch Tabian, data binding getting started, and this is the repository that we're going to start with. So you can either just clone it or download it. I'm going to download it, and then I'm going to open it with Android Studio. So here I have it downloaded. I'm going to rename it to just data binding getting started. And I'm going to copy that, I'm going to put it into my Android Studio folder, so where all of my Android Studio projects are kept. Okay, I've got the project in the right folder. Now I'm going to go open an existing Android Studio project. Going to find it. Okay, if you're having problems, I was having issues opening the project. If you are, just go to invalidate caches/restart, and you should be at the same point I am then. And now we just got to configure the SDK. So if we open the logcat, we can see it's telling us that we need to configure the SDK. So I'm just going to, I guess I'm going to choose the 27.0.3 version for the build tools and click OK. Okay, now let's press play and see if it's building correctly. It opened this window, so that usually means that the SDK, sorry, a bunch of pop-ups here. Let's click play. Okay, app's running. Good. So we're ready to start. So this first thing you want to do with data binding is you need to tell Android Studio that you're going to use data binding in your project. So step one sort of is go to the SDK manager, go to SDK tools, and make sure that this Android support repository is installed. You need that to use data binding. So that's step one. Step two, I've already done. So if you go into your build.gradle file, you'll notice there's this data binding enabled equals true. That is required to use data binding. That's basically just telling Android Studio that you're going to use data binding in your project. And that's it. There's only two things you need to do. So the data binding library is a code generator. It generates code to make things easier and more convenient for you when you're building your projects, and to tell Android Studio which layouts you want to use data binding with, or which activities or fragments you want to use data binding with. It all kind of starts in the layout. So I'm going to open up activity main because this is kind of the main layout that we're going to be working with in this project. And the first thing you need to do to tell it that you're using data binding is add these layout tags to the very top. And you add those layout tags, and then you take the entire contents of the layout. So I'm just going to cut that, and you paste it inside the layout tags. Now Android Studio knows that you want to use data binding with this layout. So if I was to rebuild the project and give the code generator a chance to build the required files, once this is done loading, we can go into activity main activity, and we can check to see if it generated the required class. So it'll generate a new file, activity main binding. So this is what's called Pascal case. The the cases here. So we have activity, and then it removes the underscore, and then it capitalizes every first letter after an underscore, or also the first letter. So lowercase activity becomes uppercase activity. It removes the underscore, and then it capitalizes the next letter, which is M for main, and then it appends the word binding. And this is what's going to hold all the variables for the view, everything you need to use data binding basically. So I'm going to add a little heading here, just say data binding. And now we can actually get rid of this set content view and just do mbinding equals data binding util dot set content view, reference the context, and then r dot layout dot activity main. And that's going to inflate the view just like we were doing before. So if I run this again now, you're going to see the exact same thing as we did when we first ran the app just a few minutes ago. So there we go. We have our data bound view. So that's kind of the very first. That's step one for anything to do with data binding. If you're using a fragment, if you're using an activity, it's always going to be generally the same process. We're not going to actually look at fragments. It's a little different, but it's generally the same. You add a layout tag to your layout, and then you declare your binding object, and then you bind the view. So that doesn't seem like you save much time. You actually wrote one extra line of code as compared to just doing set content view. But it definitely does pay off dividends, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's add a little bit more space here. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to set a product to this view. I've created a product object class that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parameters that describe what it means to be a product. Title, description, image, price, sale price, ratings, number of ratings, and a serial number. And then I have a products class here with a whole bunch of products in it. They're just a bunch of stuff from my Pluralsight course. I have a data binding Pluralsight course, so I use the same products. This is just kind of a resource. So what does it mean to be a product? Well, here we have it declaring a new product. It gives it a title, gives it a description, gives it a rating, gives it a serial number. We have an image, which is in the drawable folder. This is the price, this is the sale price, and we have the number of ratings. So each product in this class has these different properties, and they're all just a little different. We're just going to use a single product. We're going to choose one, and we're going to bind it to the view. So that all probably sounded very confusing, but generally just the takeaway from what I just said is I have a list full of products. We're going to choose one of them. I'm probably just going to choose like this red lamp, and we're going to set that product, that particular product, to this view and display all of its properties in this view. So that's I just wanted to quickly go over the resource classes there. And this string util and the big decimal util class, they just have custom methods in here. We'll talk about those later. So just don't worry about those two. There's not really anything special going on here. Choose quantity dialog is the dialog for choosing the quantity. So it's just gonna pop up a list of numbers when you click on this button right here, but we'll talk more about that later too. So don't even worry about that right now. Okay, so how do we bind a product object to our layout? That's our objective now. So let's go into the layout, and we need to pass a variable to the layout. So with data binding, you declare variables in the layout, also actually in the activity, but you declare them in the layout, and then you pass them to the layout file, and the layout file will set them to the respective widgets. So let's open up what's called a data tag here, and inside the data tag is where you can declare all of the variables for the view. So I'll open up another new tag. I'm going to open a variable tag, and the name is the variable name. So you can call this anything. I could call this foobar. It doesn't matter. It does not matter what this name is. It's just a variable just like any other variable in an Android project. But I'm going to call it product because it's going to be a product object, so that makes sense. And then here you want to specify the type. Since it's going to be a product object, we want to reference the product class. So I'm referencing this class right here inside the models package. And that's what you see here, codingwithmitch.com, data binding, getting started, and then models. So I'm going to click that, and that's going to import the product object class. So this is doing exactly the same thing as if, suppose I was in main activity, and I wanted to add a product object. So I'm just going to create a variables heading here, and I'm going to go private product and product. And as you can see, if we take a look at our imports now, it's referencing the product class by importing that class. That's the same thing that I'm doing right here, but we're doing it in a layout. And so now that we have this product in here, we can reference the variable inside of the widgets. So this is the number of ratings. That has a number of ratings, right? Yeah, so that has a number of ratings. We'll start with an easier one first. We're going to do the title, because the title is just a string. So suppose we wanted to set the title to this widget. When you're using data binding, you go at and then 2 squiggly braces, and that lets Android Studio know that you're going to do something to do with data binding. You're going to be referencing one of your variables or something from inside of this data tag. So we're going to scroll down, and now I can write product to reference our product object, and then I can reference all the properties for that object. So as you can see, these are all the parameters of the product class. We want the title, so I'm just going to type in the title. But if I was to run this right now, we would get an error. And we'd get an error because in main activity, we haven't set the product object to the binding. So right now, this knows what the product class is, but it doesn't have an actual product set to the variable. So what does that mean? So if we go into main activity, what we want to do is get a product object. So we can go actually we need to reference the products class first. So products equals new products, because we need to actually get a resource from our resource class. And then we're going to do mproducts, or mproduct equals products dot products. So this is a list of the product objects right here. That's this array right here. It's just a big list of all the products. So I'm referencing that, and I'm just going to get the 0th position. So that means I'm getting the first one in this list. I'm referencing this red lamp product right here. So that's good. Now we need to set the product to the binding. So I just do mbinding.setProduct. Notice there's a set product method here. Whoops, and set the product. So before I run it, I just want to show you something. So at the beginning I said it doesn't matter what you call this. I said you could call this foobar. It doesn't matter. Now if I go back to main activity, notice the set product method is now red because we don't have a product variable in the layout anymore. We have a foobar variable. So I would have to do set foobar, and then that would actually set the product. But obviously we don't want to call it foobar. That doesn't really make any sense. So we're going to go back and call this product. Go set product. So that's all we need to do. Now I can run it, and we should see the title set to the title widget. Okay, so there we go. None of the other widgets are set because we haven't passed any of the variables or any of the parameters, but as you can see, the title is definitely being set right up there. So that's it. That's how you set something to a view, and then you set the properties of it. And kind of the nice thing about data binding is now we're done in activity main. I don't have to do anything else in here. All the work is going to be done in main activity. All the rest of the work is going to be done in activity main. So if I go in here, now I need to work on the rest of these properties. So we'll do the number of ratings. So the number of ratings is an integer. So if we go to the product class, the number of ratings is an integer. And you can't actually set an integer to a text field using data binding. I'll show you what I mean. So if I do the same thing here, I do num ratings, and I run this, we're going to get an error. Okay, so the app crashed. Let's take a look. Not sure why it's not showing. I'm just going to filter the package here. So let's copy the package, go to edit filter, paste that in. Let's see. It's not showing an error. That's weird. So I'm going to rebuild and try running that again. It definitely crashed, so I don't know why the error is not showing, but it should come up here now. Okay, there we go. We got our error. So let's see. It says resource not found, string ID. Yeah, so basically it's telling me that no, that was not good. You can't do that. And that's because you can't set an integer to a text parameter with data binding. So there's a couple ways you can work around this. The first way is you can just do string.value of, just like you would do in a Java file. Like if I had an integer in here and I wanted to change it to, I had an integer, my int equals 1, and I wanted to change it to a string. So string my int, I would do string.value of, and I would pass my int, and that would convert it to a string. So this is the exact same thing we're doing in the layout file. So if I delete this, go back, that's what we're doing here. So if I run this again, it should work and there'll be no problem. So we have the app, now we have the number of ratings being displayed up here, and you can see obviously there's no errors because it's running. So that works, that's good. That's kind of the first way you could solve the problem. But we don't actually want this to look like this. We want brackets to be around this. So in order to do that, you got to do something extra. Kind of intuitively, you might think, oh, maybe you can do this, like kind of what you do regularly, like an activity file. But that doesn't work. You can't just add text like that. So instead, what you do is you create a helper class to help you, and that's kind of what this string util class is for. So if we open this up, you can see I've created this convert int to string method, and that's what this does. Oh no, yeah, that one. It was supposed to be this one, but anyway, so what we'll do here is add some brackets. So if I add a bracket here, and then I add a bracket on the other side, now that we can use this method to surround that value with brackets. So if we go back to our file, we're going to go up to the top and we're going to import that class. So do import, and we want to reference the type. So we're going to reference our string util class that I was just in, where we created our method, convert it to string. And now we're going to use that method here. So I can go string util, because I've imported it, and I'm going to go convert into string. You can see it pops up there, and there we go. So we can reference a static method. You can see this is a static method. It takes an integer as an input and it returns a string, a specially formatted string that I just customized. So now if I run this, the ratings will be surrounded in brackets. So there, as you can see, now our number of ratings is surrounded by brackets, which is exactly what we want. So a couple ways to solve the problem. You can just use kind of a default method that you would use in a Java file, or you can create a custom class and then import it and then reference it in the widgets. So that's pretty cool. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is the rating bar. So that's the one that's going to display the number of stars here. This so it's displaying this number right here, the rating number. And this actually takes a float. So we need to, if we look at our product class, the rating is actually a big decimal number. So we need to convert a big decimal number to a float in order to add it to the rating bar. So we're going to have a new kind of method for that, and that's going to be this one right here. So in order to use this method, we need to import the big decimal util class to our file. So let's go up to the top here and write import. And once again, do type. And we want to reference our big decimal util class. Whoops. So close that off. Now scroll down. I'm going to go big decimal util, and then get float, I believe is the method name. Oh, whoops, we need to there we go. So get float, and then we want to reference our product, and then we want to reference the rating, and that should be good. So let's now run that again, and if we check, let's open the products class here and just double check everything. So the red lamp product should have a rating of 4.5, so we should see 4.5 stars being displayed in the widget. And there we have our 4.5 stars. So that's one way to do that, but this is actually pointless. You don't even actually have to do this, because if you look in big decimal util, all it's doing is it's taking a big decimal number and it's calling float value on it. So if you go to activity main, you don't even actually need to do this. So if I can just get rid of this. I can do product.float value. And that's going to do the exact same thing. So if I run this again, I got an error. I probably typed it wrong. Let's see. Yeah, it should be just value.float value. Value.product. Oh, sorry. Product.rating float value. And there we go. We have our rating being displayed. So there's two kind of different ways to do it. Obviously, we don't need to use this method because all it's doing is calling float value, which is what we can do right inside the widget itself. So next one, let's see what we got here. We got the image. The image we're going to come back to because it's going to be a little tricky to do. I'll show you why. So if I go source, and let's set product.image, and if I run this, I'll show you why it's going to be a little tricky. We're going to have to actually build a custom binding adapter to set the image. So you can see it's coming through as a purple color. And the reason for that is if you go to the products class and we look at our red lamp, it's referencing a drawable file that I've included. So what's actually happening here is when I do product.image is the drawable file is actually only an integer. It's an integer that points to the resource in memory. So it's an address. But what happens when I do source equals product.image, basically it's just seeing an integer. So Android Studio thinks that I'm setting a color to it. So if I was to, like for example, if I was just to type some random hex color here, then it would set a color. That's the same sort of thing that's happening here. It thinks that I'm setting like an integer to this widget, which I'm not. It's actually a pointer to a resource in memory. So we are going to create a custom binding adapter to help Android Studio determine what's going on there. But we'll come back to that after. We're going to do some of these easier ones first. Okay, so let's do the price. The price is the next one here. So this first text view is for displaying the red price. So if I actually open the demo app here, so here's the demo. This isn't the version we're working on. You can see that there's a price in red, and then there's a slashed out price here if there's a sale price. So we're going to need to do a little bit of logic, a little bit of custom logic in here. And we're going to use what's called a ternary statement for this. So before I talk too much about it, let's just write it in. So this text view is the red one right here. So this needs to either display the price or display the sale price if there is one. So you can see in the case of this picture, there's a $100 sale price and a regular price of, I think that says $185.50. It's a little small, I can't really read it. So in this case, this does have a sale price, but in the case of our red lamp product, the red lamp product has a regular price of $10.99 and has a sale price of $9.50. So we need to write some kind of logic here to handle whether or not to display a sale price here. And as I said, we're going to use something called a ternary. It's called a ternary statement. So first, let's tell Android Studio we're going to use something to do with data binding. And so I guess I'll show you the method first. So if you go into the product class, it has this method. I wrote this method here called hasSalePrice. And what it does is it checks to see if there is a sale price. So if the sale price is greater than 0, it returns true. If it doesn't, it returns false. And that's what we defined to be a sale price in this video. So if a product has no sale price, let's go to the products class. For example, this yellow lamp product right here, if we take a look at it, it has a sale price of 0. So if we go back to our product class, if it has a sale price of 0, this method will return false. If it has a sale price greater than 0, then this will return true, which is the case with our red lamp product. Okay, so let's go back to activity main. So what we can do is go product.hasSalePrice. That will return true or false depending on if a sale price exists. And then we just want to write the ternary. So if it does have a sale price, then we do product.salePrice. And if it doesn't have a sale price, then we do product.price. So that would be it's saying if the product has a sale price, display the sale price. If it doesn't, display the price. But there would be a problem here because, as you know, we can't set numbers to text fields with data binding. So the sale price and the price fields are actually big decimal numbers. So if we look here, the price and the sale price are big decimal numbers. So we're going to need some kind of custom method to convert these to a string, and it's got to be a specially formatted string because we need it to display display the dollar value and then also the cents. So only 2 decimals are allowed to be on these strings. And I created a method in the big decimal util class just for that. So that's what this get value method is for. It's going to convert the big decimal value to a dollar value and then convert it to a string and return it. So that's what this is right here. So once again, we're going to use our big decimal util class. So I'm going to go big decimal util dot what was it called? Get value, and then just surround both of these with that method. So I'm just going to copy this here and scroll over, and there we go. So now let's run it and take a look and see if that's coming through properly. Cool, so there's our price. You can see the price is coming through. But that's only displaying the sale price now. So now we need to work on the actual price. So let's go and display it in this kind of striked out version. So we're going to do the same thing. Actually, in this case, we don't need to write a ternary for the text because if there is a sale price, then we want it to show. If there isn't a sale price, then we don't want it to show. But no matter what, this is going to be displaying the actual price. So regardless of anything, this is going to be displaying the actual price. So product.price, no matter what. The difference is going to be whether or not it's visible. So in the case of, go to the products class. In the case of a red lamp product, obviously it's going to be visible. But in the case of a yellow lamp product, we just don't want to display it. It's just going to be invisible. So we can use another ternary and set the visibility. So we can do visibility. And so if product.has sale price, once again, then we want to set the visibility. So we can actually reference the view class. So if it has a sale price, then we want it to be visible. Otherwise, we want it to be invisible. So if the product has a sale price, we want to show this. Otherwise, don't show it. And since we're using the view class here, we need to import it at the top. So we scroll up and we go to import type, and we want to reference the Java Android view class, just like that. And that should be everything we need for our prices. So let's run that and take a look. Cool. So we have our regular price being displayed there, or sorry, our sale price, and there's our regular price slashed out. Now just to test it, we should test with something that doesn't have a sale price. And as we looked at in our products class, the yellow lamp does not have a sale price. So let's go to main activity, and I believe the yellow lamp is the second in the array. Yeah, it's the second one. So I can just set this to 1, and that will change the product to one that does not have a sale price. And there we go. So in the case of the yellow lamp, we're only seeing the regular price because there is no sale price. So everything is working as we expect. So I'm going to change this back to the 0th position so we see the slashed out. And now go back to activity main and let's work on the next part. So let's see here. So the next part is going to be the quantity. So that's going to be this little box right here. And if we take a look at the test application, we want to display a string that says QTY colon and then the number, then the actual quantity. And also when we click on that, it needs to open up a dialog so we can select a quantity. So I can select 5, and then 5 is passed down to the view down there. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. We need to, number one, I guess first display an integer representing the quantity. And number 2 is we need some kind of on-click listener to click this and then inflate choose quantity dialog, which is this class right here. So we'll start with the easiest thing first. First, we're going to set the quantity. And so the product object class actually doesn't have a quantity variable. The quantity is going to be independent of the actual product itself. So to display a quantity here, we're going to need a new variable. So let's go back to the top and let's create a new variable. So I'm going to go variable. I'm going to call it quantity, and it's going to be of integer type. That's all I need to do. Now I can scroll down to where I was, and I'm just going to add the data binding thing and pass the quantity. So now just that number will be displayed here in this text view. So now let's go into main activity, and we need to set the quantity to the binding. So mbinding set quantity, and we'll just set it to a quantity of 1. So let's run it and take a look and see what that looks like. The app crashed, and I bet you can guess why. We just passed an integer to where you can't pass an integer. So we need some kind of a specially formatted string here anyway. So if we open up the test application, we need to say QTY colon and then display the integer. So I created a custom method for doing just that. I believe it's in the string util class. So here, the method called getQuantityString will take an integer as an input, and then it will output a string that says QTY colon and then convert that integer to a string. So this is the method we're going to reference. So we're going to go down here, we're going to do string util dot get quantity string, and then we're going to pass our quantity. So let's run that and take a look. There we go. So we have our QTY and our number. Next is going to be the on-click listener and inflating that dialog. So right now if I click this, it does nothing. So that's what we're going to work on now. And to do that, we're going to use an interface. There's a lot of different ways you can do this, just like there's a lot of different ways you can add an on-click listener in main activity. Like you could implement the view.onClickListener interface and then set the clicks that way, or you could do something like binding reference something and then just do set on-click listener. There's a bunch of ways to do it, but we're going to use an interface. So I'm going to right click on the main package directory and I'm going to create a new interface called iMainActivity, and we're going to create a method called inflate quantity dialog. It's not going to take anything, it's just going to be a method for blowing up a dialog. So let's go into main activity and we're going to implement that interface. So iMainActivity, now click the red light bulb, implement the methods, implement the method, and now in here we're going to inflate the dialog. So choose quantity dialog equals new choose quantity dialog, and then dialog.show, and we do get support fragment manager, and we want to reference the name of the dialog. So r.string, obviously I've added this ahead of time to the strings.xml file, and that's going to inflate our dialog. So now how do we use the interface with data binding? Because as you know, you have to pass variables to the view, just like we've done, or you have to import libraries if you want to reference them. And using an interface is no different. So we actually need to pass the interface as a variable to the layout. So we're going to create a new variable. I'm going to call it iMainActivity with a lowercase I, and now we're going to reference the iMainActivity class that I just created. Now we're going to go back to main activity, and we want to set the interface to the binding. So binding set iMainActivity, and we want to reference the context, or sorry, we're going to tell it that we're going to reference iMainActivity and then reference the context. So now, just like these other variables, we have a iMainActivity interface set to our layout. Now we can reference the methods for that interface. So in our case, we just have a single method, inflate quantity dialog, and we can reference that in our layout. So if we scroll down, and we're going to add it to this relative layout right here. This relative layout is the one that contains kind of this whole thing here. So we need to do onClick, and then we're going to get started with the data binding and do two brackets, a right caret, and then we're going to reference iMainActivity and do inflate quantity dialog. And that's all we need to do. So we don't need to set an on-click listener. This on-click attribute is taking care of everything we need. So let's run that and see if we're getting our dialog popping up. Okay, let's click it, and there we go. So there is our dialog. So the on-click attribute is working correctly, our interface is working correctly, everything's looking good. But currently it's not sending it back to the layout file. So if I select something, the number isn't being set. So we're going to need to use another interface method for that. We need to send that value back to main activity so that it gets set, so we can set the quantity to the binding. So let's go to choose quantity dialog, and I've already added an on-click listener and everything to the list view here. So really all we need to do is call some kind of a method in here that's going to send that value back. So if I go to iMainActivity, we can create a new method, so void, just do set quantity, integer quantity. Now go back to choose quantity dialog. We can just create an instance of the iMainActivity interface. And then just do iMainActivity, set quantity, and we can get the quantity from the adapter. So, so I'm going to do integer parse int, because it's going to be a string value, because the values in the list view are actually strings. So if you look at the this is what's set to the list view, and these are strings. So we'll need to convert it to an integer, since the set quantity method accepts an integer. So I'll do string and then adapter view, get item at position I. And that should do it. So that'll pass the quantity back to main activity. So if we open main activity, we need to implement that new set quantity method. So get set quantity, and now we can set that quantity to the binding. So we just do mbinding set quantity to quantity. Now let's run it and see if that's working. All right, click the dialog, select a number. There we go. So the number is being passed back to the view. So that's good. The dialog opens. I select something from the list. That quantity is then sent through the iMainActivity interface, and main-activity picks it up and sets that quantity to the binding just by writing mbinding.setQuantity. So that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at what's next. Just the add to cart button. So I'm actually not even going to do that because we're not actually adding anything to the cart. I could print out a toast or something, but we'll leave that for now. Let's work on the image. So if we go up, let's work on that image that's displaying the color. So for this, we're going to need to build a custom binding adapter. A custom binding adapter is kind of like another way to build a custom method, but more detailed, I guess. So really what you can do is create custom attributes. So before I even talk about it, we're just going to do it because it's just going to sound confusing. So let's go, and I'm going to create a new package. So right click on the main package directory, go to new package. I'm going to write data binding, and then inside the data binding package, I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call it glide binding adapters, because in here this is where we're going to put binding adapters just for setting images with glide. I'm going to give some more space here. So how do you make a binding adapter? You start with the binding adapter annotation, and then inside of the brackets you want to give a name to the binding adapter. So this is what's going to show up in the attribute in the layout. So I'm just going to call this image URL because we're going to be setting, I could call it image resource, but I'll just leave it because we're going to be using that to set an image. So I'm going to create a static method, public static void. I'm going to call it set image. This name doesn't matter. I could do set image resource just so it's different, so you can see that they don't have to match. And then I'm going to pass the widget type that we're going to be setting, which is an image view, and then of course the resource. So in our case we're using integer resources because we're referencing drawables, so I'm going to write an integer resource. But typically you probably, if you're going to use data binding in an app, it's probably going to be setting a string resource. Probably 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a string resource, because databases will typically hold a URL pointing to an image in the form of a string resource. We're going to create another binding adapter for that, but just for now we're going to work on this drawable. So next we need to get the context. So context equals view.getContext, and then we're going to set some request options for glide equals new request options. Just do placeholder r.drawable, r.drawable, just do IC launcher. We'll do error, same thing, r.drawable.ic launcher. And now we're going to use glide. So glide.with context, and then we want to set the request options, and then we want to load the URL, so image URL, and then load it into our image view. So this is exactly how you would use glide normally. Just as if we were in main activity and we wanted to set the image, you would have done the exact same thing in here if you wanted to set the image. But instead, with data binding, you got to create a custom binding adapter. So now we can use this custom binding adapter in our layout. So if we go to activity main, and I write app, and you can see now that image URL method is popping up here. So I can do this, and then I can reference the image, so product.image, and now it will work properly because we have a custom method for setting that image. This is referencing the binding adapter method right here. So if I was to change this, just to show you, if I change this to image resource, this would have to be image resource. So now if I run this, the image should be displaying as it's supposed to. So there we have our red lamp. And that pretty much completes our layout. So we have our title, we have our rating, we have our number of ratings, we have the price, we have the sale price, we have the quantity, we have a dialog for selecting the quantity, and we have an add to cart button, but that doesn't do anything. So that's it. And so what I was talking about before about the string resources is, let me just open let's go to reddit.com. Most of the time when you're setting images, you set a string resource. 9 times out of 10, that's usually how it is. So we're going to go to earth porn, and we're going to grab an image. So I'm just going to pick any one, doesn't matter. I'm choosing to want it complete random, selecting the image. So this is what would be, this is a URL pointing to an image on the internet. And I'll try and set this and I'll show you that it doesn't work. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call it test URL, and it's going to be a string. And I'm going to go down to where we just set that image. Where we just set the image here. So I'm going to pass test URL here, and now I'm going to go into main activity and do m binding set test URL, and I'm going to paste in that URL that I got from the internet. So with Glide can definitely handle this, right? Glide can set anything pretty much, but this isn't going to work because this only accepts an integer. So you can see there's the error coming up. So what you need to do is you need to overload this to accept strings also. So if I'm copying that, I'm just going to change this input to a string. Now if I run it again, it will work because now there's another method for accepting a string. And it's not working because I don't have internet permission. So it's trying to get an image from the internet. So users permission internet. Try running that again. Looks like there's an issue with the image. Now, let me try a different image. Glide doesn't like this image. I don't feel like troubleshooting it. Let's just choose a different one. Try this one. Go to main activity. Change this. Try that again. I just realized I didn't have my Wi-Fi on the device I was testing on, so this wasn't working. So I've turned Wi-Fi on now, so the image should load. And there we have the image. So you can see that now it can accept a string resource, and if you wanted to accept any other type of resource, you'd have to do the same thing. You just overload it, change the object type, and you would be good to go. So that's it for the video. This is just kind of a brief introduction of data binding. I just produced a new Pluralsight course. It was launched the other day on data binding. It goes much more in depth. This is honestly just barely scratching the surface of what you can do with data binding. You can see we saved a little bit of time, and definitely our code is a little more concise, a little better, but it can definitely get a lot better still. In the course we look at custom observable classes, which will actually update parameters in the layout without you having to do anything, which is really awesome. So if you have a view that's constantly being updated, or values are changing to the view, maybe you're bringing in different data from the internet somehow, data binding is definitely going to save you a lot of code in terms of that if you're using custom observables. And I definitely encourage you to check out the course. It's really good, really great getting started kind of data binding course. This was just kind of a sneak peek. Now you hopefully see you have a bunch more tools in your tool belt. You can import variables to views. You can use an interface. You can import custom classes and reference static methods. Create a custom binding adapter. In the actual Pluralsight course, we look at something called two-way data binding, which is updates to views causing updates to other views. Some really cool stuff. This is the course here on Pluralsight. It's called Android Data Binding Getting Started. Of course, Pluralsight does cost money to join, but you can start a free trial. There's going to be a free trial link in the description of this video. So if you want to try Pluralsight out and watch my data binding course, click that link and you can get 10 days free on Pluralsight. Actually, while you're watching, I might as well show you the full version of the app we actually build in the course, in my data binding course on Pluralsight. So this is what we're building. We're building kind of an e-commerce app. I tried to make it look like Amazon. I think it looks quite a bit like Amazon. There's a bunch of products you can choose from. I can select one of these. Let's just select the fidget spinner. Of course, you can choose the quantity. This is the screen we were just working on in the video. I can click add to cart. You can see that it was added to the cart. I can adjust the quantities in this cart, and this is what's called two-way data binding right here. So you can see the view is updating in the list, and then it's also updating in the cart up there. So the items are changing, the cart total is changing, everything is changing. So, and then I can, if I increment this down to 0, it will actually get removed from the cart and everything's updated. So this is what we'll be building in the course if you choose to take a look at my data binding course on Pluralsight. But that's it for this video. Hopefully it was helpful, and as always, thanks for watching.